At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the Voice Ogre, and let's begin.
Their superstitions are, frankly, quaint.
That was the line. The one that poisoned the sterile, ion-scrubbed atmosphere of the Concordance Grand Chamber. Tullian, a creature whose avian ancestry showed in his fine mantle of plumage and a far deeper, instinctual arrogance, adjusted the drape of his ceremonial sash. The feathers, layered like plates of polished agate, caught the hall's artificial sunlight, scattering it in cool blues and greens across the central podium. He gestured with a delicate three-fingered hand at the hologram that wavered above him. A crude pictograph, sketched by some pre-contact human, depicted a tall, winged silhouette with glowing red eyes of light for eyes.
The mono-welders can't even get off their own rock. Because of this, they grew bored and they developed these myths as entertainment. The humans of Sol 3 refer to this entity as a Mothman.
Tullian clucked. His voice, a marvel of modulated resonance, carried through the vast, marble-walled amphitheater without need for amplification. 1,000 delegates from 1,000 worlds stirred with a soft rustle of condescending amusement.
An omen of disaster. Their folklore, their collected fictions, are riddled with such baseless terrors. These are the relics of an unenlightened past our rationalist founders wisely purged from our own histories centuries ago.
He puffed out his chest, the feathers around his neck fluffing with an air of immense self-satisfaction.
We, of course, scanned their world for tangible threats. Warships, planetary-scale energy signatures, weapons of mass destruction. We do not waste resources cataloging a developing species' nightmares. Their preoccupation with these fictions is...
He paused, letting the weight of his judgment settle.
Quaint.
The chamber filled with the soft, patronizing chimes of 1,000 different forms of laughter. It was the sound of ancient civilizations, who measured their histories in geological time, regarding the new, boisterous child in their midst. The human representative, slated to formally accept Earth's humiliating probationary, non-voting status, was late. Another clear sign of their barbarism, no doubt. A loud metallic clang erupted from the antechamber, a sound sharp and vulgar in the acoustically perfected hall. A brief digitized squawk followed from the security network. A panic alarm choked off mid-trill. Before the honor guard could so much as shift their ceremonial pikes, the colossal, sound-dampened chamber doors slid open. The breach of procedure was so profound, so utterly unthinkable in this place of rigid order, that the laughter died in 1,000 throats. A wave of shocked, horrified stillness washed over the assembly, extinguishing all sound, save for the low hum of the life support systems. Framed in the doorway stood Cormac Mac Jones. He wore a rugged, much-maligned human garment of treated animal hide over a simple black shirt and cargo pants, a stark contrast to the flowing robes and polished chrome of the delegates. He held his flimsy envoy pass up to the security panel for a moment, then jammed a jury-rigged frequency spoofer into its diagnostic port. The device, a chaotic tangle of wires, a repurposed power cell, and what appeared to be a common Terran dining fork serving as a focusing antenna, flooded the lock's phase gate authenticator with a torrent of contradictory authentication signals. The panel sparked, hissing a plume of acrid smoke, and the colossal doors completed their opening cycle. 2 towering Praxian sentinels, whose multiple upper limbs were crossed defensively over their chests, remained at their posts. They were oddly still. They weren't unconscious or injured. Their multifaceted ocular sensors swiveled, trying to reconcile the empty spaces where Mac's companions had been a microsecond before with the data streaming from their own internal sensors. To Mac's right stood Charon. He was 2 meters of silent, winged judgment, his form a perfect living incarnation of the quaint hologram still flickering above Tullian's head. His crimson eyes glowed a steady, analytical light that seemed to draw the ambient energy from the room. His presence alone had overloaded the guards' threat scanners with a cascade of dimensional paradox errors. Their internal logic cores now furiously debated whether he existed in 1, 3, or 11 dimensions simultaneously. Charon was the alien who originated the Mothman myth. To Mac's left stood Willow. She was a pale, gaunt figure of unnatural height, all whipcord muscle and impossibly long limbs. She possessed a stillness more terrifying than any overt threat, and her presence seemed to drop the ambient temperature by several degrees. She had moved between the Praxian guards like a flaw in their optical feed, a whisper of motion too swift for their advanced sensors to register, leaving them bewildered with the distinct, unnerving sensation of having been weighed, measured, and found wanting. Willow's people originated the Wendigo myth. The stillness in the chamber became absolute, a physical weight pressing down on everyone. A Satan historian, a floating, bell-shaped creature of living glass whose internal light patterns broadcast its emotional state, flashed a panic, strobing sequence of terror, confusion, and existential dread before its cognitive network shorted out. Its light extinguished, and it drifted unconscious to the floor with a soft, wet plop. Mac ignored it all. He ignored the gasps, the agitated flutter of Tulian's feathers, the low hum of 1,000 different species activating their personal defense fields. He walked a direct, unhurried line toward the central podium, the worn-out heels of his combat boots clicking like a slow-burning fuse in the cavernous hall. He stopped directly in front of the stunned Magister, whose beak hung slightly agape. Mac extended a hand, a gesture the Concordance Universal Translator tagged as pre-contact greeting of non-aggression.
"Hi, I'm from Earth,"
Mac said, his voice level but with a certain grit that cut through the silence. He gestured with his thumb toward the towering figure beside him.
"That's Charon, and for the record, he finds the term omen reductive. Bad for his brand."
Charon reached out to shake the Magister's hand.
"I'm from Earth too, obviously,"
I said, a little gruffly.
"Even though it's not the place I originate from, it's the place I call home."
The tableau held, frozen and charged. Tulian stared at Mac's outstretched hand as if it were a venomous serpent. His fine feathers, typically a model of perfect grooming, were ruffled in genuine, sputtering shock. He was attempting to formulate a response, something scathing and dismissive that would reassert his authority. But his mind, for the first time in his long, orderly life, came up empty. Before he could summon a single coherent squawk, a scarlet alarm light began to strobe across the chamber, bathing the marble and the stunned delegates in rhythmic pulses of crimson. A frantic aide, a small, multi-limbed Jatir whose exoskeletal plates clicked with agitation, scurried toward the podium, tripping over its own feet in its haste.
"Magister, an urgent distress signal from the Vesper system. It is a Code Omega event."
The aide stammered, its manipulator claws fumbling to plug a data slate into the podium's console. The condescending hologram of the Mothman vanished, replaced by a chaotic schematic of the Vesper system. A major agricultural colony in the system's 5th planet was under siege. A wavering, unstable tear in the fabric of space, a dimensional rift, hung in the planet's orbit like a festering wound. Icons representing the Concordance's most advanced warships blinked red, indicating critical status.
"Their defense fleet is neutralized,"
the aide choked out, its voice tight with panic.
"The crews are unresponsive. All we are receiving from their communication channels is a song."
On the display, live sensor readings confirmed the aide's report. Concordance destroyers, bristling with graviton lances and phase disruptor cannons, drifted aimlessly. Their systems remained active, their shields at full power, but their crews were completely catatonic. From the planet's surface, text reports flickered in, painting an even more horrifying picture. Entities matching long-purged Concordance Acrophia files for Sirenidae were overwhelming population centers, Worse, a multi-headed, rapidly regenerating organism, classified on the fly as a hydroform, had emerged from the rift's epicenter on the planet and was carving a path of utter destruction through the colony's main city. Panic, a rare and ugly emotion in this chamber of calculated diplomacy, began to ripple through the delegates. Their best ships, their most logical and advanced weapons were being rendered useless. They were being defeated by a melody. Tullian stared at the tactical schematic, his carefully constructed arrogance melting into the cold, harsh slag of fear. His entire worldview, a neat and tidy universe governed by physics and established procedure, was collapsing. The myths were real. The fairy tales were real. And his fleet, the pride of the Concordance, was being dismantled by a tune. Every delegate in the chamber, from the silicon-based life forms of the Tau Ceti Reach to the methane-breathing oligarchs of the Andriod Collective, now looked at the one group in the room that did not seem surprised. They looked at Mac Jones, who had let his hand drop and now leaned casually against the podium, arms crossed, chewing on a wooden toothpick he'd produced from somewhere inside his jacket. Tullian, in a rising tide of desperation, finally acknowledged him.
Your species, you originate from a Deathworld.
He spat, the accusation laced with a thread of pure terror.
A Hazard 15 class cesspit. You must have encountered things like this.
Mac glanced at him, then back at the chaos on the screen.
We just call it home,
he muttered.
Feels like a high-security penitentiary some days.
Tullian's head snapped toward him, his dark, avian eyes wide.
You know what these things are?
He whispered, a horrified statement of fact. Mac spat the toothpick out. It skittered across the polished marble floor, a tiny splinter of wood in a cathedral of technological marvels.
Know 'em? Hell, my great-grandpappy probably told ghost stories about 'em around a campfire. We have a whole library on how to deal with this kind of stuff. You guys just filed it all under fiction.
Desperation, it turns out, is the universe's greatest lubricant for swallowing pride. Tullian, with a visible gulp that shuddered throughout his entire feathered body, made a decision that would shatter centuries of Concordance policy.
Name your price, human.
A slow, predatory grin spread across Mac's face. It was the grin of a man who held a winning hand for a very long time, just waiting for the stakes to get high enough.
Full, unrestricted operational command of the Vesper relief effort,
Mac said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority.
A complete and total waiver of all 1,428 Concordance safety, conduct, and engagement regulations. Full hazard pay for me and my team, deposited up front. And,
he added, his grin widening,
an unlimited, unsupervised post-mission expense account.
Tullian's feathers puffed out in a reflexive spasm of indignation at the sheer audacity. The expense account alone was an insult to every budget committee in Concordance history. But just then, a fresh wave of panicked, garbled screams from the Vesper communication feed echoed through the chamber. A stark reminder of the unfolding catastrophe. The Magister's decision was made for him.
Granted,
he hissed through his beak, the word tasting like ash.
Just fix it.
The Concordance moved with surprising speed when properly motivated by terror. On the way back to his ship, the Cryptid, docked in the station's disreputable, low-rent cargo bay, Mac was granted access to the full, unredacted data stream from Vesper 5. On his datapad, he scrolled past pages of useless fleet telemetry, panicked casualty reports, and frantic requests for orders from ground commanders who were seconds away from being lulled into a fatal stupor. He found what he was looking for in a hastily assembled xenobiological classification file. Serenidae, it read, auditory psionic predator. Method of attack, hypnotic vocalizations inducing catatonia and suggestibility. Mac let out a short, harsh laugh that earned him a curious look from the passing maintenance drone.
Sirens? Ha! Amateurs.
Aboard the cryptid, he strode past the chaotic but functional cockpit and into the armory. The room was a hoarder's paradise, a testament to Mac's philosophy of, if it ain't broke, add more guns to it. Sleek Concordance plasma rifles were racked next to brutalist human shotguns and ancient-looking harpoon launchers. He ignored them all, walked over to a large, dented metal footlocker, and kicked it open. Stenciled on the lid in faded white paint were the words, Anti-Sonic/Psionic Kit, for noisy bastards. Inside, nestled in worn, oil-stained foam, were several sets of industrial-grade noise cancellation headphones, a box of high-intensity multi-spectrum flashbang grenades, and a large, greasy-looking jar filled with a thick, yellow, waxy substance. He grabbed the jar. Willow, who had been silently observing him from the corner of the armory, tilted her head in a rare display of curiosity. Her long, pale fingers traced the edge of a wicked-looking blade she was sharpening. Mac held up the jar.
Beeswax. One of the oldest tricks. A song can't kill you if you can't hear it. The frequency they use needs a clear path to the inner ear to start the whole limbic system cascade. This just gums up the works.
He tossed a set of heavy-duty headphones to her.
These are for the locals, and if any are left with their wits about them, you and Sharon will be fine.
He knew from experience that Willow's auditory system was so alien that the siren song registered to her as little more than annoying and an off-key hum. Sharon, meanwhile, perceived sound as just another set of colliding waveforms in the universal foam. Trying to hypnotize him with the song would be like trying to drown a fish. This was expertise, born from a very long, very strange, and very violent history. It was the simple, practical wisdom of a people who had spent millennia living next door to the monsters under everyone else's beds. The interior of the cryptid was a chaotic but strangely beautiful testament to function over form. Wires that should have been in conduits were bundled with zip ties and snaked along the ceiling. Spare parts and salvage tech were bolted directly to the walls. The air carried the sharp scent of superheated dust from a sparking console, stale coffee, and high-grade lubricant. The ship's AI, glitchy, salvaged unit with deadpanned early-generation text-to-speech voice named Minder, announced their departure with its usual brand of morbid optimism. Propulsion engaged. Navigating through heavy traffic. Probability of explosive decompression in the next rotation due to improperly secured cargo hatch. A non-trivial 12%. Have a pleasant journey. Mac was at the main console in the cockpit, one hand on the controls, the other deftly using a multi-tool to hotwire a power conduit that had shaken loose during their less-than-gentle docking procedure. He briefed his team over the ship's communication system.
All right, here's a skinny,
he said, yanking a wire free and ignoring the shower of sparks.
We got a flock of songbirds with a killer voice and a multi-headed lizard that plays whack-a-mole with its own face. It's just another day at the office. Willow, you're on crowd control for the singers. Sharon, need you running point on the big guy. Find its nest, find its weakness, find out if it's ticklish, whatever.
In the cargo bay, Willow gave a sharp, affirmative rap of her knuckles on a bulkhead. She meticulously checked the edge on a massive, wickedly curved blade from the fang of some long-dead beast from Earth's forgotten eras. A nervous Vesperine militia officer, his face a wavering, anxious hologram patched in from the besieged colony, stammered. But by the founders, what is she? Mac glanced at the holographic feed, not missing a beat with his wiring.
That's Willow. Concordant xenobiologists classified her species as Homo sapiens borealis because they're tall, pale, and remarkably good at surviving in the cold. It's galactic profiling, basically. Just a heads up, she doesn't talk much, but she's one a hell of a listener. Just don't get between her and her lunch, and you'll probably be fine. Yeah, probably.
From the co-pilot seat, Sharon's synthesized voice cut through the comms, a perfect monotone of digital comm. Mission failure probability currently stands at a comfortable 78.3%. This variable increases by approximately 0.4% with every pop culture reference you make, Mac. Mac just grinned, finally jamming the stripped wire into a fresh port. A nearby console flickered back to life.
See? He's the optimist on the crew. Now, let's go make some noise.
The cryptid dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a gut-wrenching jolt that sloshed coffee from the mug in Mac's console holder. The scene outside the main viewport was chillingly beautiful. The space around the lush, green world of Vesper 5 was a ghost fleet. Dozens of sleek, powerful Concordance warships hung in perfect, silent arrangements, their navigation lights blinking in serene, automated patterns. Their shields hummed with latent energy. Their weapon ports were primed, but they were utterly dead. There were no hails, no warnings, no frantic calls for assistance. The only thing that flooded the communication channels was the song. It was impossibly beautiful, a layered harmony that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the bones. It was a melody woven from pure desire, promising peace, release from all burdens, and the fulfillment of every dream one had ever held. It was the sonic equivalent of a warm bed on a cold morning, a lover's embrace, a final, perfect absolution. It was the deadliest thing Mac had ever heard. Minder's monotone voice cut through the spell like a scalpel through silk. Warning, psionic frequency detected, attempting to bypass auditory and psychological dampeners. The song's core frequency is targeting synaptic pathways associated with reward and memory, recommending immediate withdrawal and a course of aggressive sonic therapy. Mac could feel the music tugging at the edges of his mind. A sweet, deadly lullaby trying to rock his consciousness to sleep. He shook his head violently, the phantom taste of his mother's apple pie fading from his tongue.
Sharon, how we looking?
Sharon, seemingly immune, sat perfectly still, his glowing red eyes fixed on the sensor readings. The frequency exploits a recursive feedback loop in the mammalian limbic system. It promises a simulated resolution to core psychological conflicts, effectively trapping the conscious mind in a perpetual state of bliss. It is mathematically elegant. Mac grunted, gripping the controls tighter.
Great. They weaponized elevator music. Time for a counteroffer. Minder, full power to the cacophony engine.
Mac ordered, his hand hovering over a large, red, completely unguarded switch on his console. The switch was labeled, in Mac's own messy handwriting, Party Procedure.
External projectors only. Play track 1 on the Get to the Chopper playlist.
The ship's AI responded without a hint of irony. Acknowledged. Playing Skull Engine by the Terran musical artist's Perpetual Grinder. May whatever gods you believe in have mercy on us all. A deep, thrumming hum built as the massive external projectors, salvaged from a decommissioned dreadnought's planetary bombardment array and crudely bolted to the cryptid's hull, powered up. Then, a wall of raw, psychoacoustic data erupted from the ship. The engine didn't broadcast sound into the vacuum. It translated the sheer, brutal chaos of the music into a weaponized carrier wave, a torrent of psionic static designed to overwhelm and corrupt other frequencies. The two forces met in the void between the ships. Psionic harmony collided with weaponized data stream grunge. The siren's song, so delicate and complex, was drowned, shattered, and utterly annihilated by the sheer, brutal force of the projected noise. A tidal wave of raw data slammed into a lace doily. On the planet below, the effect was instantaneous and devastating. The sirens, whose entire predatory strategy relied on the delicate, resonant web of their song, were thrown into complete disarray. Their beautiful harmony became a cacophony of pained, confused shrieks, as their shared psionic network was overloaded with a torrent of noise they could not comprehend or counter. Their minds, evolved for intricate melody, were being sandblasted by pure weaponized chaos. On the cryptid's tactical display, their psionic signatures, previously a subtle, blended field, flared up like 1,000 angry red beacons. They were exposed, vulnerable, and furious. Mac grinned, the deck plates vibrating under his boots from the sheer power of the output.
There you are, you magnificent bastards!
The cryptid landed hard in the central plaza of a ruined city, its landing gear crushing an ornate fountain. The surviving Vesperine militia, a few dozen terrified soldiers, were huddled in a barricaded government building, looking out at the human ship as if it were a second apocalypse. Max strode down the ramp, holding the greasy jar of beeswax.
Shove these in your ears!
He barked, tossing the jar to a wide-eyed officer whose elegant facial tendrils were trembling.
Deep, don't be shy. That is unless you want to spend the rest of your short, miserable life dreaming about your childhood pet.
They moved out into the silent, debris-strewn streets. The projected noise had stopped, leaving an unnerving quiet broken only by the distant, enraged shrieks of the disoriented sirens. Chiron's red eyes scanned the rooftops, his head tilting at an unnatural angle. The primary psionic signal emanates from the bell tower of that structure, he reported, his synthesized voice cutting through the tension. He pointed a long, slender finger toward a tall, ornate building a few blocks away. It is the alpha of the nest, the focal point in their collective consciousness. Neutralize it, and their coordination will collapse entirely. They rounded a corner, and the group of the sirens regrouping around what was left of a public park appeared. They were humanoid beings of an almost painful beauty, their forms radiating an aura of grace and perfection. They were trying to re-establish their song, their voices weaving together in a discordant, broken melody. Before the militia could raise their weapons and start firing wildly, Mac pulled the pin on 2 flashbangs and lobbed them in a high arc toward the bell tower. The grenades exploded with a blinding flash and a deafening crack, specifically tuned to disrupt psionic frequencies. On the tower, the alpha siren shrieked in agony. Down below, as the other sirens were momentarily stunned by their leader's pain, Willow moved. She was a pale blur against the gray stone of the city. She did not charge. She flowed, using the rubble and ruined vehicles for cover. Her movements were not of soldiers. They were of prison guards, and apex predators, brutal and utterly without waste. She slid behind one siren, her hand striking its neck at a precise nerve cluster, causing it to collapse without a sound. She used another's momentum against it, leveraging a joint lock that sent it tumbling into a third. She moved through them with a swift, non-lethal finality, disabling them with the cold skill of someone who'd spent a lifetime pacifying much larger, much more dangerous things. The militia just stared, their plasma rifles lowered. Mac clapped the nearby soldier on the back, making him jump.
See? Not so tough when they can't sing you to sleep, are they?
With the immediate siren threat neutralized and the survivors being rounded up by the militia, the true problem became horrifyingly apparent. Leading away from the now flickering dimensional rifts, ground zero point were massive gouged tracks in the plasticrete, each one the width of a transport vehicle. The edges of the track sizzled, emitting a foul-smelling, acrid smoke. The hydroform. Willow crouched low, her long, pale fingers hovering just above one of the tracks, her head tilted as if listening to the ground itself. Above them, Chiron unfolded his great dark wings, the leathery membrane catching the smoky air. He launched himself into the sky with a powerful, silent thrust, circling once before his voice crackled over Mac's comm. The entity is leaving a trail of significant dimensional instability. It is moving towards the northern refinery complex. The geothermal and high-energy signatures from the facility are likely acting as a beacon for it. There was a pause filled with the sound of whirring calculations. Probability of an ambush from the eastern quadrant, 91.2%. The open terrain is tactically disadvantageous for us. Suggest westerly approach through the dense urban sector. Mac looked east, towards a wide-open, suspiciously clear boulevard that offered a direct route to the refinery.
Ambush alley, he grinned. Perfect. A direct approach will rattle it. It'll be expecting us to be cautious.
He moved to walk east, but Willow was suddenly in his path, a silent, unmoving wall. She held up one hand, palm out, a clear sign to stop. Then she pointed to the ground beneath the inviting boulevard, then to the east. She brought her hands together in a sharp, collapsing motion, mimicking a structure caving in on itself. Her meaning was perfectly, terrifyingly clear. The ground there was unstable. The boulevard was a trap, a deliberately cleared killing field designed for something heavy to fall through. Mac paused, looking from her intense, unwavering gaze to the open boulevard. He trusted her instincts more than his own bravado.
All right, fine,
he grunted, changing direction.
Scenic route it is. Never argue with a lady who could smell a trap a mile away.
The westerly trail led them through a maze of collapsed buildings and abandoned vehicles to the edge of a colossal, tiered strip mine on the city's outskirts. It was a massive man-made canyon, a wound in the planet's crust that descended for miles in a series of giant steps. Mac pulled up a geological survey of the area on his datapad.
Sharon, you seeing this?
Sharon landed silently beside him, his wings folding neatly against his back. Analysis. The hydroform has established a temporary nesting site at the quarry's lowest point. It is drawn to the residual geothermal energy and exotic heavy metal deposits within the strata. Its biosignature is spiking. It may be preparing to replicate. Just then, an old, grizzled Vesperine, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and grit, approached them. He wore the uniform of a foreman.
I'm grown,
he said, his voice a low rumble.
This was my site. That beast, it is sitting atop It's sitting right on top of our main geothermal tap.
He gestured to the vast pit.
We were in the middle of decommissioning this whole operation when it hit. The demolition charges, they're all still in place. Fully wired, linked, and ready. We were scheduled to collapse the whole pit for land reclamation next week.
Mac's eyes lit up. A plan, a beautiful, chaotic, and wonderfully destructive plan clicked into place in his mind, with the satisfying finality of a well-oiled machine. He turned to the engineer, a wide, manic grin spreading across his face.
You're telling me that you have an entire canyon pre-rigged to blow?
The engineer, Grull, nodded grimly.
Fully charged. The network is stable. It just needs the detonation sequence from my command console back at the main office.
Mac clapped him hard on the shoulder, nearly knocking the smaller Vesperine over.
Mr. Grohl, you just became my new best friend. Get your team. We're not just gonna kill this thing. We're gonna bury it under a mountain.
The plan was certifiably insane, which is precisely why Mac loved it. Phase 1, get the monster's undivided attention. He piloted the cryptid himself, dropping it low over the quarry, scraping the rusted metal sides of the canyon walls and sending showers of sparks into the gloom. He bypassed every safety limiter on the ship's main reactor, diverting all non-essential power into a raw, unfiltered energy bleed. The ship's signature flared on the Hydra's primitive senses. A brilliant, irresistible beacon of pure power. A challenge. The response was immediate and apocalyptic. The ground at the bottom of the quarry erupted as the hydroform burst forth, a writhing mass of scaled flesh and multiple snapping heads. It was bigger than he'd anticipated. Much bigger. It let out a multi-throated roar that shook the very foundations of the quarry and began to scale the terraced walls with terrifying, unnatural speed.
There's the bit boy,
Mac muttered, yanking the cryptid into a hard bank and blasting out of the quarry at full throttle. The Hydra gave chase. It was a frantic, high-speed pursuit across the ruined landscape. The colossal beast smashing through buildings as if they were made out of cardboard. An alarm blared on the console. Shield integrity at 15%, Minder announced calmly. Aft shield emitter is offline. Recommend evasive maneuvers, or alternately, preparing a brief, heartfelt apology to your chosen deity. One of the Hydra's heads lashed out, spitting a stream of viscous acid that splattered across the viewport, the reinforced plasteel crazing and smoking.
Fine.
Do it the hard way!
Mac yelled, kicking the sparking console in frustration. He unbuckled, lunged across the cockpit, and with a grunt of exertion, yanked a thick, smoking power conduit from a port clearly labeled life support, non-essential. Amidst a fresh shower of angry sparks, he shoved a live conduit into the port for the aft shields. The shield indicator flickered erratically before glowing a steady, reassuring green just as another stream of acid hit, sizzling harmlessly against the restored energy field. Mac fell back into his seat, breathing heavily, the manic grin returning to his face.
Percussive maintenance never fails.
While Mac played Matador with a planetary-scale bioweapon, Charon sat in the co-pilot's seat, his crimson eyes glowing with intense focus. He was not just navigating. He had jacked his consciousness directly into the cryptid systems and was using the ship's most powerful sensors to perform a deep spectrum analysis of the Hydra's unique energy signature. It was a key, a continuum fingerprint that he now used to slice through the Concordance's deep archives. He bypassed layers of security procedures and firewalls with contemptuous ease, the Concordance's most advanced data security crumbling before his multidimensional processing. He found it, a heavily encrypted file, buried under centuries of digital dust and deliberate redactions. Project Chimera. The precursors, the legendary race that had seeded the galaxy, didn't just fight bioweapons, they had engineered them. The Hydra was one of theirs, a failed siege engine. Linked to that file was another, buried even deeper, protected by cognitive locks designed to make the searcher forget what they were looking for. Containment Procedure 7, Long-Term Exile Penology, Planet Designation Terra, Hazard Class Self-Sustaining. A final, terrifying subfile contained a chilling addendum. The precursors had not just abandoned their prison, they had released a slow-acting, self-propagating redaction code into the galactic datanet, a conceptual virus designed to systematically find and erase any and all records of their most dangerous creations, ensuring that no one would ever come looking for their galactic Alcatraz. The Great Redaction hadn't been a political purge by the rationalists. It had been a final activation of a precursor booby trap. The Concordance ignorance was engineered. Charon processed the data in a nanosecond, the implication settling with the cold, hard weight of truth. Mac. His synthesized voice cut through the chaos of the chase, clear and steady. The Concordance's ignorance was a failsafe. The precursors erased the memory of this place. Earth was not just a prison. It was a secret one, designed to be forgotten. Humanity. We are descended from whatever was left behind when they locked the doors and threw away the key. We are the children of the wardens, or perhaps the inmates who took over the prison. Mac executed a gut-wrenching barrel roll to avoid a snapping jaw the size of a shuttlecraft. He was silent for a moment, processing the revelation that his entire species was a product of a forgotten cosmic landfill. He let out a dark, breathless laugh.
That explains a lot about Florida, then.
The cryptid screamed back towards the quarry, engines glowing cherry red. The Hydra, now completely fixated on its prey, followed, its roars of fury shaking the very air. The ship was battered, its hull scorched, its shields flickering like a dying candle. But Mac's flying was a masterclass in controlled chaos.
Whoa, you magnificent bastard! Get ready to hit the big red button!
He yelled into the comm to the engineer waiting back at the command office. He pointed the ship's nose down and dove straight into the massive man-made canyon. The Hydra, blinded by rage and instinct, followed without hesitation, throwing its colossal body into the pit with reckless abandon. Down and down they plunged, the rock walls a blur. At the last possible second, when the ground rushed up to meet them, Mac pulled back on the stick with all of his strength. The ship's ridiculously overpowered engines, pushed far beyond any sane operational limit, engaged in a full vertical burn. The cryptid shot upwards like a missile, rocketing straight up and out of the quarry just as its pursuer hit the bottom. Below, the Hydra was momentarily confused, trapped at the bottom of a vast terraced bowl, its multiple heads swiveling around, searching for its vanished tormentor.
"No!"
Mac roared into the comm. Miles away, Grohl slammed his hand down on the detonation console. A series of deep, subterranean thuds rippled through the ground. Not a loud explosion, but a profound, bone-jarring vibration. Then, the walls of the quarry gave way. From every side, 1 billion tons of rock and earth cascaded downwards in a thundering, unstoppable avalanche of geological fury. The Hydra let out one final, multi-throated roar of pure, unadulterated fury before it was silenced forever, buried under a newly formed mountain of its own tomb. The dust began to settle, but the threat remained. The wavering, unstable rift still hung in the sky, a silent, menacing terror in reality. Max stood before the colony's massive atmospheric terraforming processor, a colossal dish antenna the size of a city block aimed skyward. With him was the grizzled Vesperine quarry engineer, Grohl, who now looked at Mac with a mixture of awe and terror.
"Do we turn that dish into a gun?"
Mac asked, his voice dead serious. Grohl stared at him, then at the dish, then back at Mac. His facial tendrils writhed in agitation.
"You're insane. It is a weather modification array, not a weapon. The power converters would vaporize. The energy conduit grid isn't compatible with a focused high-energy burst." "Well, then we bypass them,"
Mac countered, a wild, brilliant look in his eye.
"We're not looking for a clean surgical shot. We're looking for a big, messy one. We just need to hit that rift with enough raw, unstructured energy to destabilize it. We're not shooting it. We're just shoving it until it falls over."
Inspired, or perhaps infected, by Mac's sheer, unadulterated madness, Grohl got to work. He directed a frantic, desperate effort to hotwire a planet. They physically rerouted the entire colony's main power grid and siphoned the emergency batteries from dozens of downed concordant ships, leaking everything directly to the dish's core emitter. It was the technological equivalent of hooking a fire hose up to a fire hydrant by smashing them together with a rock. Sharon, monitoring the insane, uncontrolled energy buildup on a datapad, provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. "The cascade failure will be imminent and catastrophic," his synthesized voice stated calmly over the crackle of overloading circuits. "However, my calculations indicate that if you pulse the energy output at a resonant frequency of 34.9 terahertz for precisely 1.7 seconds, you will create a harmonic dissonance that should collapse the rift's event horizon before the cannon destroys itself and its entire hemisphere of the planet." Mac grinned at the terrified but determined engineer.
"You heard the moth. Let's make it happen."
Mac stood at the master control panel of the terraforming dish, his hand hovering over the jury-rigged activation panel. The air around them crackled with raw, untamed power, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. Every light on the console blinked red.
"On my mark,"
Mac said, then grinned at Grohl.
"Fire in the hole."
He slammed his palm down on the activation panel. The lights across the entire colony flickered and died as every last watt of power was shunted into the cannon. The dish groaned, the metal of its superstructure screaming in protest as a blinding beam of pure, untamed energy. A chaotic, crackling lance of raw power lanced from its center into the sky. It hit the rift dead center. A moment of profound silence descended. Then the rift screamed. A sound that was not a sound, rather a psychic tearing at the very fabric of reality. It contorted, warped like a reflection in boiling water, and then imploded with a deafening, non-auditory crack that shattered every window for 50 kilometers. The sky returned to its normal, peaceful state. The tear in the universe was gone. In the sudden, profound silence, Mac slumped against the now dark console, utterly exhausted. I reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a can of cheap, warm beer he'd been saving, popped the tab, and took a long, slow drink.
"See?"
he said to no one in particular, his voice hoarse.
"Told you it'd work."
Back in the grand chamber of the Concordance, the atmosphere was profoundly different. The arrogant amusement was gone, replaced by a somber, fearful respect that was almost a physical presence in the room. Magister Tullian stood at the podium, his magnificent plumage looking less majestic and more subdued, as though it had been through a strong wind. He was formally announcing the Concordance's unanimous emergency vote to elevate Earth from a probationary backwater to a full voting council seat, with a special designation in interdimensional defense. As he spoke, the colossal chamber doors hissed open. Mac, Sharon, and Willow entered. They were still covered in dust and grease from Vesper 5. They hadn't bothered to clean up. They didn't need to. The entire chamber fell silent as they walked to their newly designated seating area, their steps echoing with a new, hard-won authority. After the official proceedings, Tullian approached Mac privately, his usual entourage keeping a respectful distance.
"Your methods are chaos, Jones,"
he said, his voice low and strained.
"Utter, infuriating, regulation-shattering chaos."
He paused, adjusting his sash.
"But the Concordance's auditors have confirmed your expense account has been paid in full. Your receipt for one used mountain was particularly novel."
Just then, a timid delegate from a species of sentient resonant sound contained within an intricate containment field approached them, its field wavering slightly.
Envoy Jones, your historical archives, your mythology,
the delegate chimed, its voice like a complex chord.
What other horrors have you catalogued?
Mac pushed himself off the wall he'd been leaning against. A slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. He looked from the petrified sound delegate to the humbled magister.
Yeah, well, sometimes a mono-worlder's nightmare is just the right tool for the job.
He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried through the silent, listening hall.
It's, frankly, quaint.
The delegates nearby did not laugh this time. They leaned in closer, ready to listen.